In the heart of rural Kentucky, where rolling hills stretch like green waves and the sky seems to touch the earth at every horizon, there stood two properties that were once one. The Caldwell farm occupied the east side of the gravel road. The Morrisons held the west. Between them rose a stone wall. It wasn't just stone upon stone. It was solidified hatred. 3 generations of bitterness transformed into a physical barrier. Thomas Caldwell was 62 years old, hands calloused by hard work and a heart even more hardened. Every morning before coffee, he walked to the wall and checked to make sure no stone had been moved. It was a ritual, a vigil, as if that wall was the only thing keeping the world in order. On the other side, Robert Morrison did the same. 65 years old, back bent from carrying so much resentment. He'd taught his children, and then his grandchildren, to never ever cross that line. "The Caldwells are thieves," he'd say, spitting the words like poison. "They stole what was rightfully ours." The story began in 1960, an inheritance poorly divided after the death of Joshua Caldwell, a patriarch who left 2 farms to 2 brothers who couldn't get along. William Caldwell and Henry Morrison were brothers-in-law, married to the Sullivan sisters. But when Joshua died, William got the more fertile land, the acres that touched the creek. Henry protested, said he'd been cheated, that documents had been forged. Words turned to shouting. Shouting turned to violence. In 1963, during an argument about fencing, Henry Morrison fell from a ladder, broke his neck. The Caldwells said it was an accident. The Morrisons swore it was a push. The funeral happened in silence. The wall began rising the next day. In 1985, during a terrible storm, a fire broke out in the Caldwell barn. Daniel Morrison, Henry's son, was seen in the vicinity. He swore his innocence. But when Daniel died 2 years later, hit by a truck on the main road, whispers circulated. Some said it was an accident. Others said the driver was a distant cousin of the Caldwells. The police never proved anything. The families stopped speaking entirely. And now in 2025, the 3rd generation inherited the hatred like a surname. Sarah Caldwell, Thomas's daughter, was 32, with a 6-year-old son. Jake. The boy had wheat-colored hair and curious eyes that asked too many questions. Sarah raised him alone since the divorce, working at the hardware store in town and coming home every evening to help her father on the farm. She taught Jake about responsibility, about hard work, about family, and about the Morrisons. "Never go near that wall," she'd say, pointing through the kitchen window. "Those people are bad news. They're not godly people." Across the road, Elizabeth Morrison, Robert's granddaughter, lived a similar life. Widowed at 28, she raised her 5-year-old daughter Emma alone, a small child with brown curls and a smile that lit up the grayest days. Elizabeth worked remotely as an accountant, took care of the house, and visited her grandfather daily to make sure he didn't sit alone with his bitterness. "Stay away from that wall," Elizabeth would say, holding Emma's shoulders. "The Caldwells are dangerous. They've done terrible things to our family." The children listened, nodded their heads, promised to obey. But children, as we know, carry a wisdom that adults lost somewhere along the way. They see the world not as it divided itself, but as it could be whole again. It was on a spring afternoon when wildflowers painted the woods behind the properties with impossible colors that Jake ventured farther than he should have. He was chasing a blue butterfly, the rare kind his grandmother said brought good luck. The butterfly danced between the trees and Jake followed, laughing, tripping over roots, until he realized he was lost. Not completely lost. He knew these woods, but he was too far from home, and the sun was already starting to drop. That's when he heard the crying. It wasn't adult crying. It was the broken sobbing of a frightened child. Jake followed the sound to a small clearing where he found Emma sitting on a fallen log, her knees scraped, tears running down her dirt-smudged face. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, and Emma jumped, startled. I'm lost," she said, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to pick flowers for my mom, and now I don't know how to get back." Jake didn't know she was a Morrison. Emma didn't know he was a Caldwell. All they knew was that here was another child, scared, needing help. And when you're 6 and 5 years old, that's enough. "Come on," Jake said, extending his hand. "I know the way." And just like that, without knowing it, Jake Caldwell and Emma Morrison did something 3 generations couldn't. They connected. Jake led Emma back to the edge of the woods to where he could see the Morrison house in the distance. "Is that your house?" he asked, pointing. Emma nodded, smiling for the first time. "Thank you," she said.
And then, because children do this naturally, she asked, "Do you want to be my friend?" Jake thought for a moment. No one had ever asked him that before. He was shy at school, the quiet boy who sat in the back. "Yes," he said, smiling too. "I do. Can I meet you here again?" Emma asked, hopeful. Jake looked around. The woods were no man's land. Not Caldwell property or Morrison. Just woods. God's land. "Tomorrow after school?" he suggested.
"Yes," Emma shouted, hugging Jake before running home. Jake returned to his farm with a light heart, not knowing he'd just challenged 65 years of hatred with a single act of childhood kindness, not knowing that innocent embrace was the first stone to fall from the wall, not knowing that on the other side of that solidified hatred, a friendship that would change everything had just awakened, but also not knowing that secrets, even innocent ones, never stay hidden forever, and that the war between the families was about to enter its most painful and perhaps final chapter. What would happen when the adults found out? The secret meetings began just like that, simple and pure. Every afternoon after school, Jake invented an excuse to go to the woods. He said he was looking for rocks for his collection, or watching birds, or just exploring. Sarah, busy with farm chores and trusting her son's gentle nature, allowed it. On the other side of the road, Emma did the same. She told her mother she was picking wildflowers or playing near the fence. Elizabeth, working from home on her computer, accepted it, as long as her daughter stayed where she could be called. But the children didn't stay near the houses. They ran to the woods, to that piece of land that belonged to no one, where they found each other and built a world of their own. Jake showed Emma how to identify animal tracks in the damp earth. Emma taught Jake songs she'd learned at church. They built a fort from branches, named the trees with funny names, invented stories about magical kingdoms where there were no fights or walls. "Why don't our families talk?" Emma asked one day, drawing with a stick in the dirt. Jake shrugged. "My mom says your family is bad, but you're not bad. My grandpa says your family stole our land," Emma replied, frowning. "But you don't seem like a thief." The children looked at each other, confused. Adults didn't make sense, but the children's world did. There in those woods they were just Jake and Emma, just friends. It was in the third week that Jake made a decision. He had a children's Bible, a gift from his grandmother before she died. It was small, with a worn blue cover and colorful illustrations on every page. His favorite story was the Good Samaritan. "See?" his grandmother would always say, pointing to the picture of the Samaritan helping the stranger. "God teaches us to love even those who are different from us." Jake thought about Emma, about how scared and lost she was when they first met, about how he'd helped her without knowing who she was. That was what the Bible taught, wasn't it? He wrapped the Bible in a clean piece of cloth and brought it to the woods. "This is for you," he said, extending the package to Emma. Emma opened it carefully, her eyes widening when she saw the book. "This is your Bible?" "It was my grandma's. But I want you to have it, because you're my friend, and friends share the most important things." Emma held the Bible against her chest, tears welling. No one had ever given her something so precious. "Wait," she said, and ran back toward her house. Jake waited, nervous, wondering if she'd return. 15 minutes later, Emma came back, breathless, holding something in her hands. "This was my grandma's too," she said, showing him a rosary with worn beads, the small crucifix glinting faintly in the sun filtering through the trees. "My mom says Grandma prayed with this every day. I want you to have it, so we remember that God takes care of us even when things are hard." Jake took the rosary reverently. He wasn't Catholic, had never prayed with beads before, but he understood the significance. Emma was giving him her treasure, in exchange for his. "I'll keep it always," Jake promised. "Me too," Emma whispered. They didn't know, couldn't know, that those gifts would carry immense weight, that they'd become symbols of something far greater than two children playing in the woods, that they'd become proof that love and faith can exist where hatred planted deep roots. But secrets have short lives in small towns. Sarah was the one who discovered it first. She was loading Jake's clothes into the washing machine when the rosary fell from his jeans pocket. For a moment she just stared. Then with trembling hands she picked up the object. She knew that rosary. She'd seen Margaret Morrison wearing it for years, before the woman died. Saw it at the funeral. How did it end up with her son? "Jake," she called, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Jake, come here now." The boy ran downstairs, stopping when he saw the expression on his mother's face. She held the rosary like it was a poisonous snake. "Where did you get this?" Jake swallowed hard. He'd never lied to his mother before. A friend gave it to me." "What friend?" Sarah's voice rose. "Jake, where did you get this?" "From a girl, in the woods. She's my friend." Sarah felt her blood freeze. "What girl? What's her name?" Jake hesitated. He knew that tone. It was the tone his mother used when something was very, very wrong. "Emma," he murmured. "Emma who, Jake? Emma who?" I don't know her last name. She just said Emma." Sarah closed her eyes. She didn't need the last name. There was only one Emma that age in the area. "Morrison," she whispered, and the word came out like a curse. "You've been meeting with a Morrison." "Mom, she's nice. She's my friend. You have no idea what you've done." Sarah grabbed her son's arm, not hurting him but firm enough that he understood the seriousness. "Those people are dangerous, Jake. They killed your great-grandfather. They burned our barn. But Emma didn't do any of that. She's just a girl. It doesn't matter." Sarah was crying now, tears of rage and fear streaming down her face. "You don't understand. You can never see that girl again. Never. Do you hear me?" Across the road, a similar scene unfolded. Elizabeth was packing Emma's backpack for school when she found the Bible. For a moment, she thought her daughter had borrowed it from a friend. But then she saw the inscription on the first page written in careful script. "For my grandson Jake with all my love. Grandma Caldwell." Elizabeth's world stopped. "Emma," she called, her voice dangerously calm. "Come here, please." Emma walked into the room, saw the Bible in her mother's hands, and her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "Mommy, I can explain." "Where, Emma?" "From Jake. He gave it to me. He's my friend." Elizabeth felt something break inside her. Jake Caldwell. Thomas's grandson. That man her grandfather swore had pushed his great-grandfather off the ladder. "You've been meeting with a Caldwell." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Mom, he's nice. We just play in the woods. He didn't do anything wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Elizabeth was shouting now, something she rarely did. "Emma, that family destroyed ours. You don't understand. But I like him. He's my friend." "Not anymore." Elizabeth took the Bible and put it in a high drawer. "You're never seeing that boy again. I'm going to talk to your grandfather. We'll have to watch you more carefully." The children were forbidden from leaving the properties. Jake was grounded in his room. Emma cried for hours. But the damage was done. Not just the discovery of the friendship, but something worse. Thomas Caldwell was informed. Robert Morrison got a phone call. And for the first time in decades, the patriarchs of both families felt the same thing. Betrayal. Betrayal by their own blood. "I'm going to double the height of that wall," Thomas growled to his son. "I'll put barbed wire. I don't want even the shadow of the Morrisons near my family." "I'll sue," Robert threatened. "I'll say they're coercing my great-granddaughter. But the threats were empty. What wasn't empty was the rekindled hatred. The wall that seemed to merely exist now seemed to grow, invisible but palpable, separating not just properties but any chance of peace. And the children, prisoners in their own homes, cried for a friend they couldn't see, not understanding why kindness was punished, not understanding why love was forbidden. The war had begun again, and this time it had wounded the only innocents left. How could things possibly get worse? 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of Jake staring out his bedroom window, seeing the woods in the distance, wanting to run there but unable to. 3 weeks of Emma asking, "When can I see Jake?" and receiving the same answer, "Never." Sarah watched her son like a hawk, didn't let him go out alone, walked him to the bus stop every morning, picked him up every afternoon. Jake tried to argue, cried, begged. Nothing worked. The rosary had been returned to the Morrisons in a sealed envelope, left in their mailbox without a word. On the other side, Elizabeth did the same. Emma couldn't even play in the yard without supervision. The Bible had been returned the same way, in an anonymous package. The family's return to war silence. But this time, the silence hurt more, because now there were two children feeling the pain that previous generations had built. It was on a Tuesday morning that everything changed. Jake woke up feeling strange, too tired even after a full night's sleep. His stomach hurt, a dull ache that wouldn't go away. Sarah thought it was the flu, gave him medicine, told him to rest. But by Wednesday, Jake could barely get out of bed. By Thursday, he threw up his breakfast. "We're going to the doctor," Sarah decided, her heart tightening with worry. The family doctor referred them to a specialist. The specialist ordered tests. The tests came back with words Sarah never imagined hearing about her 6-year-old son. Abnormal masses, need for biopsy, possible leukemia. Sarah's world collapsed. Within 48 hours, Jake was admitted to Norton Children's Hospital in Louisville, 2 hours from home. Wires connected to his small body. Doctors coming and going. Technical words Sarah barely understood, but whose tone she grasped perfectly. Serious, concerning. We need to investigate further. Thomas Caldwell, the grandfather who taught Jake about pride and walls, sat beside his grandson and cried for the first time in 20 years. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, holding the small hand. "You have to be okay." But Jake, between moments of consciousness and medication-induced naps, thought of only one thing. "Emma." "Mom," he said one evening, his voice weak but determined. "I want to see Emma." Sarah closed her eyes. "Jake, not... Please." Tears streamed down the boy's pale face. "I don't know what's going to happen to me. The doctors say scary things and I just want to see my friend once. Just once. Please, Mom." Sarah's heart shattered. How could she deny this to her son? How could she maintain her war while her son might be fighting for his life? "Jake." She gave me her grandmother's rosary. Don't you understand? That was her most precious thing. And she gave it to me. Because we're friends. Really. It doesn't matter that our families fight. What matters is that she cares about me. Sarah walked out of the room and collapsed in the hallway. A nurse approached, concerned. "Are you all right?" "My son is asking to see a friend," Sarah said, her voice broken. "And I don't know if I can allow it because our families have hated each other for decades over land. Land, you understand? While he's in there, maybe dying, and all I can think about is a fight over inheritance that happened before I was born." The nurse, an older woman with kind eyes, sat down beside Sarah. "Can I give you some unsolicited advice?" Sarah nodded. "I've worked in this hospital for 30 years. Seen a lot of families come through here. And you know what I learned? In the end, only love matters. Not land, not inheritances, not who was right or wrong 60 years ago. Just who you love and who loves you back. Your son is giving you a chance to choose what matters. Don't miss that chance." Sarah sat there for a long time after the nurse left. She thought about her own father, Thomas, carrying this hatred like armor. Thought about how many good things he'd missed because of it. How many neighbors who could have been friends. How much help refused out of pride. How much love wasted. And she thought about Jake, her sweet, gentle son who saw a lost girl and decided to help even without knowing her. Who gave his most precious possession because he understood something adults forgot. Faith shows itself in actions, not in walls. She picked up her phone and did something no Caldwell had done in 65 years. She called the Morrison house. Elizabeth answered on the third ring, suspicious seeing the unknown number. "Hello? Elizabeth Morrison?" Sarah took a deep breath. "This is Sarah Caldwell. I know you don't want to talk to me. I know our families. I know everything. But I need to ask something. Please don't hang up." Silence on the other end. Sarah could hear the controlled breathing, the contained anger. "My son is sick. Very sick. Leukemia, maybe. He's at Norton Children's Hospital in Louisville and the doctors don't know yet how serious it is. He's having surgery for a biopsy tomorrow and he's terrified. And you know what he asked for? He asked to see your daughter, Emma." More silence. But Sarah heard something that sounded like a choked gasp. "I know you don't owe us anything. I know you probably hate me and have your reasons. But your daughter cares about my son, and my son cares about her, and I can't deny him this, not now. Not when he might..." Sarah's voice failed. Please, just one visit, just so he knows his friendship mattered. Elizabeth was silent for so long that Sarah thought she'd hung up, but then she heard quietly a response. Emma cries every night. She asks about him, makes drawings of him and hides them under her pillow because she knows she can't talk about it. Then let them say goodbye, Sarah pleaded. Not for our families, for them, for the children who didn't choose this war. When? Elizabeth asked, and Sarah knew there was a chance. A tiny opening in a wall built over generations. Tomorrow, before the surgery, 2 o'clock, Norton Children's Hospital, room 412. I'll talk to my grandfather, Elizabeth said, her voice tense. I can't promise anything. He won't like it, but I'll try. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you. She hung up and returned to Jake's room. The boy slept, pale against the white hospital sheets. Sarah held his hand and prayed for the first time in a long while. She didn't pray for healing, though she wanted to. She prayed for forgiveness. Forgiveness for teaching her son that hatred was acceptable, for prioritizing pride over love, for almost taking from him the only pure joy he'd found, a friendship. Across town that same night, Elizabeth faced her grandfather. Absolutely not, Robert thundered when she told him about the phone call. Have you lost your mind, taking Emma to see that boy? Grandpa, he might be dying. So? The Caldwells let your great-grandfather die without help. Why should we? Because Emma isn't you, Elizabeth shouted, surprising herself and her grandfather. She's not you, she's not me, she doesn't carry your hatred. She's just a child who made a friend. And if you stop her from saying goodbye, if something happens to that boy and she never gets this chance, you'll break her heart. You'll do to her exactly what this hatred did to you. You'll harden her. You'll teach her that revenge matters more than compassion. Robert opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came. He looked at his granddaughter, at Elizabeth, with her eyes full of tears, and saw something he hadn't seen in decades. Hope. Hope that something could be different. If I allow this to happen, he said slowly, there's no going back. You understand? It would be betraying everything I've fought for. Or, Elizabeth said softly, it would be finally stopping the fight. The next morning, 2 families who swore never to speak again prepared for a meeting that none wanted, but that all the children in the world deserved. Could 65 years of hatred be broken by 2 gifts exchanged in secret? Or was the darkness too deep to be overcome by an act of childlike love? Norton Children's Hospital was a modern building of glass and hope, where parents cried in waiting rooms and children fought battles no child should fight. Sarah arrived early on the day of the visit. Checked on Jake. He was nervous about the surgery, but more nervous about whether Emma would come. Is she coming, Mom? You promised you'd try. I tried, honey, but I don't know if... The door opened. Elizabeth entered first, holding Emma's hand. Behind her, cautious and rigid, came Robert Morrison. And to Sarah's surprise, her own father Thomas was in the hallway, having arrived minutes before upon hearing the Morrisons were coming. For a moment, the adults just looked at each other. 65 years of history between them. 2 deaths, countless accusations, a stone wall. It was all there, in the heavy air of the hospital room. But then Emma saw Jake. Jake! She shouted, breaking free from her mother and running to the bed. Jake tried to sit up better, smiling for the first time in weeks. Emma stopped before touching him, seeing all the tubes and machines, frightened. Are you okay? I'm better now, Jake said, his voice weak but happy. You came. I asked every day, Emma said, tears falling. My mom said you were sick and I was so scared. Don't be scared. The doctors are going to help me. Jake took her hand. Did you bring the book? Emma shook her head. Mommy wouldn't let me, said we had to give it back. I know. They gave the rosary back too. Jake looked at his mother. Mom, did you bring it? Sarah, hands trembling, took the children's Bible from her purse. Elizabeth, breathing deeply, pulled the rosary from her jacket pocket. The 2 women looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. They approached the bed and together returned the gifts to the children. Jake took the rosary like it was gold. Emma hugged the Bible. And then, because children understand symbolism in ways adults forgot, they did something no one expected. Jake took the rosary from around his neck and placed it on Emma. Emma opened the Bible and pointed to the story of the Good Samaritan. "Your grandma marked this one with a little flower," she said. "It's about helping people even when everyone tells you not to. Like you helped me when I was lost," Jake completed. "And like you gave me this, even knowing your family would be mad." The children looked at the adults, and in their eyes was something adults rarely see in themselves: complete and unshakable conviction. "Why do you fight?" Emma asked, her voice small but firm. "Why can't you be like me and Jake?" Thomas Caldwell, the man who built the wall stone by stone, who taught hatred like it was mathematics, felt something break inside him. He looked at his grandson, pale and fragile in a hospital bed, wearing a Morrisons rosary, looked at the Morrisons' granddaughter, holding the Bible that had belonged to his own mother, and he realized for the first time in 65 years that he was wrong. Not wrong about the facts, maybe. Not wrong about who had rights to what in 1960, but wrong about what mattered. Wrong in thinking land was worth more than peace. That property was worth more than his grandson's joy. That being right was worth more than being in communion. "Jake," Thomas said, his voice thick. He approached the bed, something he'd never done with such vulnerability. "Jake, do you know why we built that wall?" Jake shook his head. "Because we thought it protected us, that if we kept our distance we'd never be hurt again. But you know what I learned today?" Thomas looked at Robert Morrison, the decades-long enemy. "The wall didn't protect us. It just isolated us. And it almost took from you the best friendship you ever had." Robert Morrison, hearing this, felt his own defenses crumble. He thought about his grandfather Henry, who fell from the ladder. Thought about his father Daniel, hit on the road. Thought about how many times he'd used those deaths as a shield, as justification for hatred. But looking at Emma with that children's Bible, remembering how his late wife Margaret prayed the rosary asking for peace, he couldn't sustain the weight anymore. "I remember," Robert said slowly, "the day Henry died. My father. I was only 12 years old, and my mother cried saying the Caldwells were to blame. I believed her. I spent my whole life believing. Taught my children to believe." He looked at Jake, then at Thomas. "But I never saw it. I wasn't there, and the police said it was an accident. But it was easier to have someone to blame than accept that sometimes bad things just happen." Thomas took a deep breath. "The barn fire. Your father was seen nearby. But the investigation said it was the storm lightning. It wasn't him. But I wanted to believe it was because it was easier than admitting we had no control. That God allows bad things to happen, and we don't always understand why." The two patriarchs looked at each other across the hospital bed where a boy held a rosary and a girl held a Bible, and they saw, for the first time, not enemies, but mirrors. Two men who'd wasted decades in a war that perhaps never needed to begin. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, and the words came out like contained weeping. "I'm sorry for every harsh word, for every look of hatred, for teaching my children and grandchildren that you were enemies. You're not. You never were. We just forgot how to be neighbors." Robert extended his hand, trembling. Thomas took it, and 65 years of silence were broken by a handshake in a hospital room, witnessed by two children who always knew the truth. Love is stronger than history. Sarah and Elizabeth looked at each other and, without words, embraced. They cried on each other's shoulders, releasing pain they didn't even know they carried. Pain from living in war, pain from teaching hatred, pain from almost stealing from their children what they needed most: hope. Jake, watching all of this from his bed, smiled. "So now," he said, his voice tired but happy, "now I can see Emma always." "Always," Sarah promised. "Always," Elizabeth confirmed. "And the wall?" Emma asked, looking at the grandfathers. "The stone wall?" Thomas and Robert looked at each other. "Tomorrow," Thomas said, "we start tearing it down. Together," Robert added. "We'll tear it down together. And then, because God works in mysterious and perfect ways, a doctor entered with preliminary results. Jake's surgery was less invasive than they'd feared. The results showed that although there were abnormal cells, the condition was treatable. It wasn't the worst-case scenario. It was acute lymphoblastic leukemia, but caught early. The chances were good. The families received the news together, embraced in a waiting room. praying together for the first time in 3 generations. 6 months later, on a clear autumn morning, 2 families gathered at the border between the Caldwell and Morrison properties. The wall was still there. 65 years of stacked stones, covered in moss and history. But today, it would fall. Jake was stronger now, hair growing back after chemotherapy, cheeks regaining color. He held Emma's hand as they watched the adults work. Thomas and Robert, side by side, removed stone after stone. Sarah and Elizabeth carried them to a new project, a memorial garden they'd plant together in honor of all who were lost. Henry, Daniel, and the decades wasted in bitterness. Neighbors came to help. News of the reconciliation had spread through the small community like wildfire through dry grass. The pastor from the Caldwells Baptist Church worked alongside the priest from the Morrisons Catholic parish. Both blessed the land, saying that here, where hatred had flourished, forgiveness would now grow. "Grandpa," Jake called when the last stone was removed. "Can we plant now?" "Now we can plant," Thomas confirmed, accepting the shovel his grandson offered. Together, Caldwell and Morrison, adults and children, planted an oak tree in the exact spot where the wall had divided the land. "So that 100 years from now," said Robert, his voice thick, "when our great-great-grandchildren look at this tree, they see unity, not division." That evening, the 2 families gathered at the Baptist church for a reconciliation service. The sanctuary was packed. The entire community had come to witness the impossible. Caldwell and Morrison, side by side in the pews, singing hymns together, praying together. The pastor invited Thomas and Robert to the front. The 2 men, both with tears in their eyes, held the children's Bible between them, the same one Jake had given Emma. "This Bible," Thomas said, his voice echoing through the sanctuary, "taught my grandson about the Good Samaritan, about loving your neighbor, and he, at 6 years old, understood something that took me 62 years to learn. A neighbor isn't someone who lives far away. It's who's nearby, waiting for you to choose love instead of a wall." Robert took his late wife's rosary, the same one Emma had given Jake. This rosary accompanied Margaret through 50 years of prayers. She prayed for peace, for healing. "I thought she was praying about the past, to bring my father and grandfather back. But now I understand she was praying for the future, for the moment when someone would be brave enough to break the chains. And it was 2 children who didn't know they were supposed to hate each other, so they chose to love." The congregation whispered Amen, and voices of glory to God filled the space. Emma and Jake, sitting in the front row between their mothers, held hands. They didn't fully understand the weight of what they'd done. They just knew that now they could play together every day, that the families had dinner together on Fridays, that Grandpa Thomas taught Grandpa Robert how to fix tractors, and Grandpa Robert taught Grandpa Thomas how to make the best barbecue in Kentucky. They knew that where there was once silence, there was now laughter. Where there was a wall, there was now a bridge. Where there was war, there was now peace. That night, as the families walked home together under a starlit sky, Jake looked at Emma. "Do you think God planned all this?" Emma thought for a moment, touching the rosary she now always wore. "I think God put us in the woods that day, but we chose to be friends. I think God gives the chances. We choose what we do with them." Jake smiled. "Then we chose right. We chose love," Emma corrected. "And love is always right." The 2 families, who for 3 generations were enemies, walked home together, no longer separated by a road and a wall, united by 2 children brave enough to see beyond what they were taught, to choose faith over fear, forgiveness over resentment. And as the young oak tree grew on the old border, its roots intertwined deep in the earth that no longer belonged to Caldwell or Morrison. It belonged to God, as it always had. This story reminds us of a powerful truth we often forget amid our daily battles. The hatred we inherit doesn't have to be the legacy we leave. How many walls do we carry? How many old fights do we keep alive just because it's always been this way? How many reconciliations do we postpone because pride whispers that to forgive is to lose? Jake and Emma teach us that innocence isn't ignorance. It's wisdom in its purest form. They saw beyond the sins of the fathers, beyond the stories told, straight to the heart of the gospel. Love your neighbor. No exceptions. No conditions. God doesn't call us to build walls. He calls us to build bridges. And sometimes, the hardest bridge is the one that crosses the distance between us and the person we swore never to forgive. But when we cross, when we choose love over bitterness, grace over justice, communion over isolation, we discover that on the other side wasn't an enemy. It was a mirror. Someone just as wounded, just as tired of the war, just as desperate for peace as we are. Today, I invite you. What wall is God calling you to tear down? What old enmity is He asking you to release? What impossible forgiveness is He placing in your heart? It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. But as Thomas and Robert discovered, when you finally let go of the weight of hatred, you find that your hands were free all along. Free to embrace, free to build, free to love. May we be as brave as two children in the woods, choosing friendship where generations chose war. May we be wise enough to understand that the greatest legacy we leave isn't land, property, or being right. It's love. And wherever there's a wall in our lives, may we have the courage to pick up the first stone and start tearing it down. Because in the end, only one thing matters. Did you choose love?